So it's very important to analyze why are men dropping out of society and specifically dropping out of a lot of corporate jobs, right? And it's because there's a lack of meaning. And we have a very excellent video here, one of my favorite videos to react to. We're going to go through right now in terms of breaking down the psychology and the impact that this society is having on men, which is engaging essentially in psychological warfare on a man's state of mind and what makes life meaningful for him.
For instance, if I was starting a business and I wanted someone to be an A player for me, someone to be high up in the business, to be a great leader, to really help the business flourish, what would I do? I would give them a ownership role. I would give them a share of the company, right? It's the same thing in society. If you want participants, really good citizens, if you want men to overcome their lower nature and rise to truly masculine and beautiful men and leaders, you need to give them ownership, or else they're going to say, fuck it. So the main impulse within most men is towards freedom. We don't want to be tied down to all of these obligations and responsibilities to our village, to the nation, to our job, to our family. Like, we just want to wander freely, right? A lot of men do. And society and cultures in the ancient world coped with this will towards freedom within men by offering them authority. And this ownership is what created citizens. And this is really important. This is what my last video is about. Bear with me if you're feeling triggered. Citizenship is when you own.
So, we're going to start with a very basic premise, right? If you want men to be engaged in society, they've got to have a stake in society. If not, we just pursue freedom, right? And this is what you see many men doing. Many men, you see the passport bro movement, you see men going to live abroad, digital nomads, men setting up their own business, or even men pursuing freedom through escapism by deciding to play video games and kind of live a life separate from society, right? A man's impulse is not to tie himself down to, a marriage, one woman, young kids to look out for, having an expensive mortgage. The impulse is to escape and live a free and independent life from this system. And there's so many different examples of this. And I think about a man's impulse to go on hiking trips, go on camping trips, go on kind of various adventures with their friends, traveling and things like that. These are the basic impulses of a man, and this is what men are tending to or leaning towards these days instead of, say, pursuing the corporate rat race, because that is not even considered a viable strategy for many men these days, right? And also he mentions around ownership. As I say, if you want men to be citizens and participating in a social contract that society is completely broken with the vast majority of working age, military age men, you need to have a social contract in place, which is an informal ownership within this society. If you're going to have men going to work and all the narrative that's being pushed at work is against men and pro-woman or pro-rainbow flag community or anything else, there's no equity men have literally in that company or in this society. And the truth is, ownership is everything. And that's why you see a lot of people, a lot of men specifically, setting up their own business because they have ownership in it. They can't be laid off from their own business. Even if they're a freelancer, one-man business, they can't be laid off from it. They might have a rough day or rough month or year, but then they can pick themselves up and push themselves in the right direction. Men don't have a stake in the success of Western civilization, whether it's their countries, their corporations, because all the values being promoted in these countries and corporations is completely against what is the best interest of men. All these countries and corporations promote and enforce values that are completely against the best interest of men. For example, open borders, men maintain the perimeter. If you're familiar with a book called Way of Men by Jack Donovan, he talks about one of the basic male impulses, the protective male impulse, is about maintaining the perimeter of the tribe, of the country, of who's in the tribe and who's out the tribe. And when you have open borders policies, it's kind of against a man's masculine instinct to maintain protection over his family or his dominion or his land, right? When you have DEI and liberalism, weak men in positions of power, like you see in Canada with Justin Trudeau, in France with Emmanuel Macron, in some of these women leaders, the leader of Finland, Sanna Marin, who was basically cheating on her husband, doing illicit substances and things like that. You see the leader of New Zealand for some time during the last few years was Jacinda Ardern, another woman who was kind of having this kind of corporate, literally a Karen running the country. If you have the image of what a Karen would be in an individual circumstance, right? Imagine a Karen running a country, and that's what you had with Jacinda Ardern running New Zealand from 2020 and the years that followed, right? When you have all these people in positions of power, intense censorship, men can't make a joke, men are toxic, men can be cancelled for any little thing that they do in society. you're just not going to have men participating or willingly participate in society. It's like being dragged to work for your oppressor at a corporation, right? There's openly biased against you in hiring, promotions, practices, freedom of speech at work. Your viewpoints on any particular topic could lead you to be cancelled. And the social dynamic, like I say, that anything you do verbally or physically could be leveraged against you as a man. And then, of course, men are not going to have a stake in society, and they're not going to be too invested in their corporate jobs.
Right? When you take away the man's role at the head of the family, or you take away the man's role in terms of private land ownership, right? You take away his sense of having a long-term stake in something. Therefore, his nurturing, he doesn't feel inspired to take responsibility for it because it has less meaning for him, okay? Now, I'm not trying to advocate for, maybe outdated and roles of masculinity. I'm just trying to paint a picture of human nature for people out there, is that when people feel like they have ownership in something, they're going to take responsibility in that thing because it has meaning for them.
So this whole concept of ownership is very key, right? And just to follow up on that, right? So as a man, let me know in the comments, what do you feel you have ownership over in this society? I think as a man, all you have ownership really over is yourself, your skills, your savings and investments, and the way you conduct yourself, basically. You only have ownership over yourself. You don't have ownership or stake in anything beyond that. Not the company you work for that can lay you off at any moment. You don't have a stake in the long-term outcome of this civilization, which is just pursuing everything that's against your best interest. Lots of men don't have any other role in society. They're not necessarily the head of the family. Even if they have a family, the woman might walk all over them in the marriage. You see less and less men in leadership roles in corporate companies. You have a lot of women in middle and senior management of teams. You have men who just don't have a long-term stake because they're not in those management roles, or they're having a bias against them from getting those hiring and promotion benefits, right? And if you're going to have men who are less invested in work, less invested in the social dynamics, they don't really have a social role to play, whatever that is, right? Unless they're in a submissive, domesticated kind of house pet role, which I say is quite common in this society. You're going to have men who just feel the complete opposite of ownership. They feel either helpless, or they feel like they can't really achieve anything in their life, because what do they have an ownership stake over? And if it's only themselves as an individual, they're going to end up living like that in a very kind of minimalist way, which I don't think is necessarily the worst thing. I think it's like a survival mechanism or coping mechanism in this system. But again, this society shouldn't be surprised that you're going to see men less and less invested in their day jobs, in society in general, and playing a role in this society that only has one role for the people, only one role for men. And what's that one role for men in this society? Is just go along with all the agendas being enforced on you that are biased against you.
But in that, the monarch, the king, he feels ownership for his entire kingdom, meaning that he is thinking generations ahead because he wants his kingdom to thrive. He's not going to overtax the peasants because he wants them to be more productive, to have better lives, so they multiply and increase the will to power of the entire kingdom. You see, the main instinct of life is to increase the power in life. And this is a very Nietzschean philosophy. And the feeling of power has nothing to do with control. It has everything to do with vitality, an increased feeling of life and expansiveness here on earth, a mastery of open space. And so the king is going to be thinking, a good king is thinking generations ahead. He's trying to, how can my people, be more productive and live happier lives so they multiply and increase the power of the nation, right? And he's thinking this way because he wants to pass down this kingdom to his children, who he also feels to be a part of himself, right? Therefore, he has all of this meaning to lead well, to lead his family well, to lead his tribe well, to lead his kingdom well. Contrast that with a president. A president is in office for 4 to 8 years, and it's a popularity vote to get him in there. And therefore, he's not thinking generations ahead. He is thinking, how can I gain popularity in the next 4 years so that people will reelect me, right? What's he going to do? He's going to drive the nation like a rental and make decisions that might be good in the short term, but are detrimental in the long term. It's kind of like if you rent a property versus you own the property. If you own the property, you're going to cultivate the land. You're going to cultivate relationships. You're going to help it blossom, and you're going to think really far into the future, generations ahead. If you rent the land, you're not going to give a fuck. Okay? You're not going to give a shit about making it better. Oh, I'm only going to be here for 4 years. I'm going to drive it like a rental. I'm going to abuse this. I'm going to pump money into the economy. I'm going to exploit the land as much as possible to, gain prestige for myself and maybe short-term gain for the whole, but to the long-term detriment. It's kind of like using.
This is very important. Like what we're seeing is a reoccurring theme here in what his messaging is. Some of my messaging is that ownership is everything. Ownership is essential, right? What men have to be the king of some sort of kingdom. And what is a man's kingdom now? Is it his home? Well, many men can't afford homes. They can't afford to have families. They're not like the patriarch in their family. They're not the king at work. They're just a replace worker drone. They're a little cog in a machine. Are they really a king of their life? Well, when they have so many aspects of their social life or how they conduct themselves socially being so harshly constrained by this system, then they're not necessarily the king of that. And many men these days, they have two bosses. They might go to work and have a boss at work, which could be a girl boss. And then in their personal life, they have a second boss, which would be their wife or their girlfriend, who dictates to them how to live their life in their free time. And I realized that type of life is not for me. And that's why it makes sense for so many men who are dropping out, because they're like, well, if this is the dynamic that is expected as normal in this society, it's completely ridiculous, right? And that's why, like I said, dropping out is preferable, whether it's guys playing video games, reading philosophy, doing the whole self-improvement thing, going to the gym, improving other aspects of their social skills. When it comes to your career, it feels like, a layoff, a lack of career growth, lack of promotions, and you're pouring energy and effort and water into a bottomless pit. That's the way I see it with a lot of careers these days. You really want to be climbing the ladder in some sense, even if you're not a super corporate ladder climber type of guy, right? But lots of times it's like you're pouring effort and your energy into, like I say, a bottomless pit, like pouring water into a cup that has no bottom at the end of it, right? It's just pouring water and it's pouring back out, right? Like some people describe that when you're renting a property, right? When you're renting a property, you're throwing money down the drain. That's a phrase that they have, right? Because you're not like paying off a mortgage on a monthly basis. You're just giving someone else money to live there. So this is what I mean. If people don't feel ownership, or men don't feel ownership, they're just not going to be any invested in doing anything of the bare minimum. And he mentions about short-term interests of politicians, and these short-term interests also apply to relationships these days, and any relationship, because every relationship these days in society is transactional, between men and women, with hookup culture, between people hopping from one job to the other because it's a transactional relationship with a company. There's no loyalty from your company between the company and worker these days. Everyone's here for like a short-term bonus or short-term gain rather than a long-term equity stake in a company, for example, right? And when you have a lack of community, a lack of tribe, borderless countries, as we see here with open border migration, it's like, what exactly could you claim as your own as an individual, as a man, right? And this is when you have men dropping out and realizing the game is rigged, there's no point participating in it.
It's really important, I think, for like revolutionary men and for more traditional men who are going their own way out here, is to think about the concept of ownership outside of political lines, outside of party lines. And that's the thing, is like, I'm not trying to subscribe to any dogma. I'm trying to think freely about how to create a flourishing humanity, right? So don't put me in any of your boxes out here. But what I am saying is that the more that man feels ownership in this life, ownership in his spiritual path, ownership of his family, ownership of his community, ownership of his life, the more responsibility he's going to take, the more empowered he's going to become as a man, and the better man he's going to become. Like, it's contrary to how modern man looks at this concept. We're like, oh, power corrupts, right? It's bullshit. We need ownership in order to feel inspired to overcome ourselves, to live for something larger. And the more that feminism rises, like, put man in his place, and the more that the world makes it harder and harder to own land, and the more that the world alienates us from shared social bonds and feeling like we have a stake in the future of our village and our tribe and our nation, we're just going to go our own way.
So that's a good point to kind of conclude on, right? It's thinking about ownership in everything. And this is what I'd encourage all of the men watching this to kind of think carefully about. You're only going to care about something to the extent you have ownership in it, right? And there's no point kind of getting around that and being like, oh, well, we're doing it for the higher good. We're doing it for some higher values, like more equality and more liberalism, or some kind of ridiculous ideology that they're pushing on you, more diversity for the sake of it. The only thing is you only have a stake in what kind of benefits you. And that's not because you're selfish, it's just basic human nature, right? Building your own legacy, right? Whether it's owning land and growing your own food, having a house that you maintain in a particular setup that benefits you, building a career or business that leads to self-sufficiency, investing more in your fitness, your health, your life, your nutrition, your family in certain cases, rather than, this kind of detached environment you're meant to be in when it comes to like lots of corporate jobs, where you're increasingly disillusioned with the lack of connection you feel there with other people, like co-workers, the company that hires you, the toxic managers that you might have to deal with, right? Now, society in corporate America is all about castrating, neutering, and demonizing and domesticating men, right? And when men have no stake in society, no authority, no responsibility, or they have a dynamic at work where they have tons of responsibilities being dumped on them with no authority, and people who are inferior to them, who are less competent than them, dictating down to them, who people could be in management roles, or people who are DEI or gender-based hires, then you're going to have men kind of, like I said, being detached and disillusioned. Now, the question is then, where do men have authority in society? Because I don't think you see men with authority in society, right? Apart from like weak liberal men who might be in some middle management roles or some kind of senior political roles. Most cases, men have no role in society. They have no authority in any sense in society. Not at home, not over their wife, not over their kids, because schools can indoctrinate the kids. A woman can just make any false allegation or accusation against the man and drag the police, make a phone call to the police and then say a man did something, and then he gets kicked out of his home and can't see his kids. In some cases, you do have authority over your life, maybe over your physical health, over your financial well-being and saving and investing, owning your own property if that's possible for you, and to a certain extent over your career growth. But to a large extent, there's lots of validity in saying that the game is being rigged against men, right? Society's lying and men are dropping out. So what we're going to do next is just look at some of the comments and how people have reacted to this very interesting video, right? Someone says responsibility without ownership is slavery, and that again goes back to men are being put in positions where they're expected to be responsible for this collapsing society, but they haven't been given authority. No meaning, respect, or purpose. No woman, family, no children, no community equals no reason to work, protect, or sacrifice. They want serfs, they want slaves, not citizens, as in the system wants men to behave like slaves and not citizens. And then you've got other cases where men have kind of gone through rough divorces, losing money on those divorces. Then you've got things where men are complaining they have no chance of owning anything in this society, being stripped of authority. And there's many different cases like that, and people from different countries outside the West. A case in South Korea where this guy is describing a very similar dynamic. So this is what it is. Expecting of men, if another worldwide conflict occurs, will society expect men to play their gender role and defend the perimeter, defend the borders of a country? It's completely ridiculous. Now, this kind of summarizes why or how society lies, the psychological warfare being played on men, and why they're dropping out of many corporate jobs, many jobs in general, or dropping out of society. So if you're interested in looking for solutions, right, and at least improving your financial situation, I'm someone who provides career advice. I've worked in the finance industry for over 10 years, some of the companies you can see on the screen right now. And what I do is I help provide all my clients, primarily men, navigate this type of weird situation, so at least they can develop a stable career and financial situation to give them the freedom to live their life more on their own terms, rather than being dictated to like some kind of serf, some kind of second-class citizen slave, which is what major corporations and majority of society is treating them like. So let me know in the comments your experience. Does this video resonate with you? I think many of you will relate to this message. And there are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.